Hey bike farmers, thanks again for checking out another one of my bike videos. Here we've got a nice older Trek 6500 mountain bike. This is a great entry-level mountain bike for any kid. It's a nice small frame, and you know, back in its day it was a really nice bike. It's got some good parts, very durable. We're gonna get this thing going just about as good as new. Go through everything on it. Yeah, really excited about this one. I had one of my viewers made a comment that they had one of these and was wondering if I could do a video on a Trek 6500, and I thought I had one in the pile, and I went out there this morning and found this one, and really I think it's going to be a good journey. Looks like we need some new grips and a new saddle. These tires look to be okay. Brake pads still have some life on them. You know, the brakes feel pretty good. A lot of times these shifters need a little bit of love, and they're still clicking, so I think just some one-step cleaner and lube will bring those right back to life. But we might as well get started, I think, on this one. One of the very first things I like to do on these bikes is I pull the seat post out. First of all, just to make sure that it moves. Frozen seat post will be a major setback. And then I make sure that it's got some grease, and this one does. You can see there, nice gooey gunk. We like to see that. And just make sure that's good and greased in there. If it's not, I'll add some. This one's good to go already, so no need to add anything. Tighten her back up. I think a good place to start with any bike is just by putting air in the tires. I can tell already that these are fine. They still have some air. This valve stem is just a tad crooked. No, asymmetrical rims. So that makes sense. I think everything's fine here. We're just gonna top it off. I have a pretty loose gauge of tire pressure. I make them firm. That's about all there is to it. Like I said, these already had air in them. They're holding air really well. That's a good sign. These are older tires, but look to be in good shape. There's still a lot of tread. And it's not always just about the tread. I want to pay attention to the sidewalls. Make sure they're not too threadbare. You can start seeing the threads here, but you know, that's okay. They're not too far gone. Another thing I'm noticing right here is when I spin this rear wheel, I'm not hearing hardly any clicking out of that Freehub. That tells me that the lubrication that's in there is all gunked up. And things aren't clicking like they want to. So I usually take something, sometimes I just hit it with degreaser. This time I'm going to use One Step. It's a real nice thin lube. They call it One Step because it's a cleaner and lube. You get it right in the right where the Freehub body meets the hub, and sometimes it's enough to work its way in there and get clicking again. Okay, you can already hear it coming back to life. So we're going to let that sit while we do the tune-up, while we work this bike, while that wheel continues to spin, that lube kind of work its way and do its magic as we work. What I did there is I just put the bike in the high gear, got the chain in the lowest cog. I like that, makes the wheel easier to get off. I'm going to grab my chain tool and we will measure the chain to see if it's stretched out, if we have to replace any of the drivetrain components. Measuring a chain is a pretty simple process here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a 0.5 millimeter side and a 3/4 millimeter side to this tool. But you take one of these and put it right in one of the links, and then try to get your tool to slide in between the other links. So this is the 1/2 millimeter side, the shorter side, and it drops in between the links, but really you gotta force it. You know, if it fell down in there real easily, then you know your chain's starting to wear out a little bit. What happens is each one of these little bushings loses a little bit of metal in the inside, and added up over 120 links or 115 links or whatever it is, you know, that adds up, and you'll get a 1/2 millimeter of stretch or 3/4. And my rule of thumb is 1/2 millimeter. Kind of depends on the bike and the rider and what we're doing. It's a maybe change the chain. The cassette's probably okay. If you're at 3/4 millimeter stretch, that means that you kind of worn things out too much, and I just go ahead and replace the chain and the cassette, because when a chain gets stretched out, they call it stretched out, although it doesn't actually stretch. It wears out and appears to be stretched. You'll get uneven wear in the cassette, and especially if you kind of favor the high gears, which are the smaller ones in the back. And if you do that, then everything wears out unevenly, but it kind of becomes married to the chain that you have on the bike. If you throw a new chain on there, you'll get all kinds of skipping. I mean, the chain will literally just go flying over the teeth of the cassette. So you have to replace both. So if your mechanic ever tells you your drivetrain's worn out, you need a chain and cassette, that is why. You know, I don't worry too much about dirty drivetrains. It's not the best thing to be riding a bike with a filthy drivetrain. A lot of times I just ignore it. This one seems like it'd be pretty easy to clean up with a few easy steps. I'm not going to do a deep clean on it. I just don't see the need. We're just going to, again, use some one step here. I'm going to, well, okay, let's go this way. Hit the chain with a bunch of one step and the cassette. Then I just take a rag. And wipe it clean. I can hear that Freehub starting to loosen up from that first squirt of one step. You know, that you can see the bike doesn't like being pedaled backwards. You get a lot of slack in that chain. That's all because the lubrication inside that Freehub is gunked up over the years. I'm going to have to address that. Well, it's already, everything's moving better. So I go both ways on wiping the chain. Yeah, it's starting to be silver again. And you can take a little brush. This always works better to pedal forward. And just kind of take something to clean the gunk off those gears. And as always, a little compressed air never hurts. Kind of blow things off a little bit there. And now's a good time to disconnect the rear brake. Which is a little, give him fighting back a little bit there. Pop the rear wheel off. Once I get that rear wheel off, I like to start the cleaning process. This bike's got some real gunk and grime on it, so start with some Dawn Power Wash. It's magic. I discovered this stuff, I don't know, last season. I always have a couple of rags going on my bench. You know, I've got a somewhat dirty and a somewhat cleaner. And then I'll even, like on lighter colored bikes, have a brand new one or a very white rag to give that last final polish. I usually just use furniture polish for the final step. It leaves a nice little shiny wax. Just lemony fresh pledge. The generic stuff tends to work a little bit better, and it's cheaper, so that's always good. Nothing fancy, just go to the grocery store and buy everything on the shelf. I buy them like 10 at a time. Actually, I had my local grocer order me a case once, but I didn't save a whole lot of money, and it was more hassle having to deal with the communication and everything with the ladies in the back. All right, this front derailleur is looking to be not quite. Oh no, it's an E-type. There's nothing they can do about it. Move it out of the way. I like to call this the nether regions. The nether regions of the bicycle. Takes a special kind of doctor to specialize in our nether regions. I have a feeling that's going to be one of my quotes that people like to put in the comments. Yeah. So that's kind of the first step. You know, you can see we got some gunk and grime. Better to be on the rig than on the bike. Here's a get a little closer up shot here doing the rear derailleur. Without the wheel on, you can crank it out like that and then give her one of these. Like it gets access to the back of it. Zoom over to this side. Do this, and you have good access to your pulley wheels. You can kind of get the gunk off of those. Pull some chain through to, yeah. And again, if you've got compressed air, which I know we don't all have, feels really good to blow some compressed air in your shoes too. Just don't do it when anybody's looking. They're gonna think you're weird. But man, it feels good. Okie dokes. Let's move on to that rear wheel. Okay. My filthy bench. I don't know what's wrong with people that have a clean workbench. Don't judge me. Well, I guess I just judged you if you happen to have a clean workbench. So I'll get the wheel up here in the truing stand. I take a look at things. You know what? We already know that this Freehub isn't spinning very well. Take the speed degreaser. This is like brake cleaner. Try to find a way to get the right. Oh, I can feel it. Feel it improving. You know, there's seals. Here we go. Waking up. There's rubber seals in there. And you got to get your chemicals to work their way into the seals. See if I can keep you in frame here. I want to get gravity to work. And really what it is it's lubrication that is, I don't know, coagulated over time. It's become less viscous and plasticized. And, you know, these degreasers will break that apart. Sort of turn it back into lube in a way. So I always clean my wheels in the stand. This one, you know, is filthy enough where I don't really have to spray it with anything. I found a dirtier rag on my bench, by the way, for this. Wheels are always just filthy. You get all that brake pad material and all of the road gunk and dirt from the trail. Everything collects on your wheels. So, in a third rag, I suppose that clicking of the skewer lever is either really distracting or lulling you to sleep. Yep, wiping every single one of these spokes. You know, there's only 32 or 36 of them. Doesn't take too long. Go through and get the gunk off the rims. Now I'm going to take, well man, I don't even know which rag. These two are about the same. Find a somewhat clean side of it at least. I'm going straight to the furniture polish. This stuff is the best. I don't know. Whatever brand that is. Really works well as a cleaner and as a polish. Which is a little redundant, I suppose. Another trick is if you have black components on your bike, alloy generally, I guess it works on steel too, but the alloy ones tend to discolor with UV. They'll kind of gray out, become like a charcoal gray. If you spray it with a waxy furniture polish and just let it sit, you don't wipe it off, it'll get shiny and glossy again. Just spray it and let it sit. Don't touch it. It'll soak right in. Kind of like Armor All. Noticing my press valve nut kind of moved here. Put that back into position. You know, I do this a lot. I do a lot of bike tune-ups. I refurbish a lot of bikes, so there's a lot of things that I do automatically. Like this little process. I used to catch my fingernails and jam my fingers on that. Now I can do it without even looking. Just like anything, practice makes perfect. If you want to get good at fixing bikes, go volunteer at your local bike charity. That's what I say. You don't get paid, but man, you learn a lot. One thing we haven't done to this yet, which we can try, is hitting this cassette and Freehub with a little bit of heat. Looks like there's plastic spacers, so we need to be careful of how much. But it's still not really freewheeling, you know. Worst case is we have to take it all apart and really deep clean it. And that's not the end of the world, but I'm going to go at it from this side. That didn't really work. All right, how about right there? Oh, there we go. All right, that seems to be helping. That's probably good. All right, winning. We like to win. Ho ho ho! It's alive! Clean some of that filth off. You can see it's dripping with delight. It's a happy Freehub. Free hubs and freewheels, right? Freewheel is when the ratcheting mechanisms are in the cassette or in the freewheel, in the gear cluster. And that's the part. And it just screws onto a fixed hub. This is a free hub screwed onto a fixed hub, which is the part of the wheel that holds the axle and bearings. And then the cassette connects to the free hub. That makes for a stronger wheel. So most of your very entry-level bikes will have free wheels because it's cheaper to manufacture. It's a little cheaper way to go. You're cutting costs to get those bikes down to as affordable as possible, but then always like the next step up, you're gonna start having free hubs because it's not that much savings. And they're way stronger, but you'll get a lot of broken axles on freewheel bikes, especially the kids' bikes when they take them off sweet jumps. All right, let's start truing this wheel. Got a nice little collection of rubber bands going here. All right, so wheel truing. Get her up in your stand, and I go by ear almost as much as sight. Now I can see, but you can't. But you know, the little gap between the tool and the rim and here. You just find where it's hitting. Okay. Find the apex. It's like right here. And then there's spokes on this side of the wheel and spokes on this side of the wheel. I'm going to loosen the spokes on your side. Just a smidge. I'm just doing it maybe a quarter turn. Find each apex and I'm just loosening those spokes just a smidge. I can get it to stop making the noise. Turn the tool in just a little bit more. Find another one and I can tighten the spokes on my side to pull it over. So you're either kind of like allowing it to relax one way or pulling it one way. It's all about spoke tension, going one way or the other. I remember when I first learned this, I was amazed that, you know, spokes pulling towards the hub this way, you know, had that much force that it would like change the position of the rim. But it works. Bicycle wheels are amazing. So what I did here is I put a little, this is an old spoke, and I just use one side of the tool at a time. And I guess it's just kind of, I mean, this time I'm tightening spokes to pull. It kind of depends on which spoke, wherever the apex is, if I loosen or tighten, I guess. Again, a lot of this stuff I just do second nature. Anyway, I think there's always a close enough point with wheel truing with these tune-ups, unless I like really find something out of the ordinary. I don't check dish and tension and all that. I certainly do with a wheel I build. But with production bikes and tune-ups, I just make it so the rims are good and straight, especially with rim brake bikes. You don't want anything rubbing. What I'm doing here, without thinking about it, is taking a dry rag, no cleaner, no nothing. And it's a relatively clean one. And just kind of going over everything one more time. And you're kind of wiping off the residue removal process. I'm not too worried about these spokes. They're good and shiny, but that is a shiny, clean wheel and true. Ready to go with a relatively good working freewheel now. Freehub. Back over to the bike, as promised. And a little bit of furniture polish. This does two things. It kind of removes the residue from that first pass. Excuse me. The first pass we took with the Dawn Power Wash. And we're kind of cleaning up that residue and polishing. So this is my pretty clean rag. I'm not removing a whole bunch of dirt here, just a little bit of gunky residue, the film. I don't know if you noticed or saw this, but right here's the decal that says hand built in the USA. I happen to be 10 miles from Waterloo, Wisconsin, Trek headquarters, where this bicycle was built by hand by someone in my local community in what I'm guessing would be the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. So believe it or not, this bike is pretty close to 20 years old already. They were doing a lot of TIG welding of aluminum bicycle frames 20 years ago, 25 years ago. We've got some real skilled welders around here. Just regular folks, not even cyclists. Regular people with a really valuable skill. Okay. Well, I got you in frame. I use Tri-Flow for everything, just about. Sometimes I'll spray my brakes with the one step because it's a little bit finer and works its way in there. But I always drop some Tri-Flow in the brake pivots. Just anywhere I can, just a couple drops. If they're really kind of gunky feeling, or I feel any kind of rust or anything that has formed over the years in there, I'll pull them off and clean them and grease them and put them back together. But even if I grease them, I put a couple drops of Tri-Flow in there to loosen things up. And then, you know, the cable's all disconnected here. So I just run a little bit of lube in the cable there. I'm going to run to the front of the bike. It might be out of frame for a second, but I'm going to do the same at the top cable housing. I just, a few drops and just kind of work it in there. And that cable is lubed. I see a lot of bikes every year. You know, my customers will bring them back to me. And I'm telling you, Tri-Flow is the best I've found. Year to year. A lot of lubes will leave a you know, they'll dry out eventually and leave a film behind, and Tri-Flow doesn't seem to do that. So that brake cable's all lubed. Wheel is clean and true. Set that derailleur back into its relaxed position. Pop the wheel back on. My skewer feels a little loose back here, so I'm going to give it a half a turn. I like skewers. My general rule of thumb is the lever, when it's sticking straight out 90 degrees, it's starting to push back, and that tends to be a pretty good tension. Sorry to get in your way here, but just wanted to reconnect that brake. All right, brake is reconnected and rubbing. I'm going to change my camera angle and adjust that brake. So these mountain bikes with the big fat tires, it's hard to get both sides of the brakes to really see everything that's going on here, but you can see the brake's only pulling from one side, so we have a brake tension issue. But before I go after that, I'm going to make sure these pads are aligned right. So I can see that this one is kind of skewed this way. It looks to be okay. You know, it's hitting the rim flat, so I'm okay with that. You know, I check to make sure that my wheel's in straight, which actually maybe isn't. Let's take a closer look at that quick. So one thing you can do is I kind of take my fingers and just measure to see if the tire is, you know, equidistant in the middle of the rear triangle. And if it isn't, then I'll loosen my skewer, and I'm pushing up with my knee on the tire and really working it in the dropouts and making sure that the axle here is sitting tightly up into the frame. Okay, now nothing's rubbing. Yeah, and it's still pulling just from one side. So that's a brake tension thing. We're going to adjust the pads on both sides and get this right. So you loosen the pad. Sometimes if you take your spring out, you know, these are just linear springs. You can disconnect it, and then it's kind of just pulling from that side. Then get the pad right on the center of the rim. I always use my 3-way Allen, 5mm here, and I'm holding the pad still and then tightening it down. And it's always going to turn a little bit when you get that last bit. So you kind of compensate for that, and I just make sure there's a little gap underneath and enough for the tire to clear. Put my spring back in there. And then I stick my bald spot right in the camera. There you go. Tuck that cable out of the way. Let's go do the other side. Yeah, so I can see, but you can't, under here, that it's just not quite right. Not exactly perfect. Now's the chance. So this one, it's already kind of touching the rim, but disconnect my spring. Let that other side pull the system over. Get things nice and flat. Now, a lot of people just toe the brake pads. Now, towing is where you make it so the front of the brake pad is hitting the rim first, and that prevents squealing. Sometimes, most of the time. It's kind of the fix for that. I don't toe the brake pads unless things are squealing. I like them to hit nice and flush. I like them to be snappy. If you toe your brake pads, you kind of get a squishy brake feel. Sometimes you have to get them to stop squealing, though. Okay, so we still have things out of tension. Now there's always tension screws here. So this is the one. It looks like we've got too much tension on this side. So I'm going to back this off just a little bit. It's helping a smidge. And then I'm going to add a little tension to this side. So I did about a full turn here and a full turn there. Every brake system is different. You just kind of got to get into it and feel. And I want them to hit at the same time and be pulling the same. That's pretty good. It's one of my favorite noises in all of bicycle mechanics. You ready? Love it. Now, in terms of how much cable we want to pull, this bike feels pretty good. I like it to be a little bit tighter. It's nice to be able to have a lot of cable slack for disconnecting your brakes, but it's not, all you need is enough. So I generally just try to tighten them to the point where there's just enough to relatively easily disconnect your brakes if you need to get your wheel on and off, fix a flat. So I just pulled, I don't know, 2 or 3 millimeters of cable, tighten that brake up, double check to make sure you can still disconnect the brake. It's got a pretty good feel. In fact, might be too tight. A little bit tighter than I like. I don't know if there's any real right way or wrong way. I think you get to decide. I think what's important is you have consistency. You want the front to feel the same as the back, and you want this bike to feel like the next one. I'm adding a little bit of tension here just to get it right. That is a balanced, adjusted, strong brake system that is rubbing. Definitely the pad on this side is rubbing. So I'm going to bounce it down, bump it down just a tad. What you were hearing there was the tire hitting the brake pad. So when I'm on this side of the bike, I'll find the brake cable and pull it. Take a good look. I still hear something. Oh, there's a little something on the tire. Oh, there's a tiny little, the tire's coming a little bit delaminated here. And it's just a minor surgery. I think I got to get a razor blade and just cut this little do-jabber off. This thing right here. This is when I cut a hole in my tire. Maybe I cut from this way. Down in there. Looks pretty good to me. Take a little piece of emery cloth. Hide the evidence. There you go. So speaking of squeaky brakes, you can take a little bit, I use emery cloth, it's like a sandpaper for plumbing. for cleaning copper pipes. I have big rolls of it, but you can go clean the brake pad off your rims. Start with a clean surface. Give yourself a fighting chance. Nothing's rubbing. Running through the gears here, I see that it's not shifting, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, if you go one at a time, it's working pretty good. I'm going to put this in the middle cog while I check things out. So one at a time seems to be working pretty well. With the shifter, if I push it all the way in, it shifts, what, 3 or 4. It doesn't quite get up to that. Yeah, it doesn't get up to that one. So that tells me that the cable's a little loose. So this is the barrel adjuster right here. I think if I just go maybe a half a turn out, that'll tighten the cable just a smidge. Oh, let's go another half a turn. Boom, there it is. Right up there. So that's pretty good. You can see we're getting, if you pedal backwards and you get that slack in the chain, that's all about this Freehub. It's still not quite where I'd want it to be, which is unfortunate. I'm gonna have to squirt some more stuff in there, I think. Maybe hit it with some heat, or just ride it. I think it's probably, yeah, it's fine in the lower gears, but you get in the higher gears when it really gets going fast, and it's a little too much for the system to handle. If you go into the highest gear, shift up to the big ring, yeah, it just binds right up. So that's no good. And my brake is rubbing. I'm gonna let some cable out. It's feeling too tight. That's probably out of frame, but all right. So here we have it, where I think the cable is tensioned properly, but we haven't lubed the derailleur cable yet. So here's my trick for lubing cables. I'm going to shift into the lowest gear, so all the way up. All right, and then without pedaling, I'm going to click the shifter all the way back down, and that relaxes the whole system, creating all kinds of slack on your cable. And you can just pull your pieces of housing out all the way along the bike. And starting up at the shifter, oh, there's a little kink in my cable. One way is to replace the cable, and one way is just to unkink it. Now, it's not perfect, but it's certainly good enough. It's still functional. You know, we're not racing for money. So a little bit of lube there and just kind of work it in. Get that reflector bracket out of the way. Okay. Move on to the next piece. And I just kind of take the lube schnozzle, and work it along the cable. your housing seated in its guides, the stops. Okay, there's that slack. And then if you pedal, there goes the slack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back down, put it in. That's pretty good. All right, front derailleur, let's check this out. So right now, I have it in the highest gear in the back, which is the smallest cog. And you can see, let me grab my pointer. You can see right here where the chain is just sort of ticking that front derailleur in the middle cog. So if you have, this is a triple 1, 2, 3 chain rings here. You know, it's just hitting it, which makes me think that this cable tension is just a little loose. But I'm going to check the other side by putting the rear derailleur in the lowest gear. And the lowest gear causes it to just barely rub on the inside of the derailleur. So, since it's just barely rubbing here, and just barely rubbing here, I think it's perfect. I think the cable tension here is absolutely perfect. You'll hear the ticking, tick, tick. That is just simply the crank arm hitting the kickstand. All right, so I think that derailleur is adjusted perfectly. It appears that the limit screws are fine, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think you can call it a tune-up, and I don't think you can call it refurbished unless you lube the cables. So again, I'm shifting it up to the big here, and without pedaling, I click it back down so everything relaxes. That gives me enough slack to loosen my housing. Couple drops of tri-flow on those cables. Get that one seated. Whew. You can feel it. I mean, it just gets better. That is better. And then I'm using one step here. Put some in the rear too, out of frame. Just let that kind of, that just works into the pivots. Everything feels great. And speaking of one step, if you have an old mountain bike and you haven't done this for a while, or mountain bike or hybrid or anything with trigger shifters, there's usually a way to get in here with some one step. And you can just kind of flush the system. Well, flood the system with one step, and then just go through and work it. Then, if you're lucky enough to have compressed air, sorry for everybody that's taking a nap. Okay, you can go back to sleep now. All right, I'm going to take this front wheel off, and then we'll clean the front of the bike, lube this front brake cable. polish things up, clean that wheel, true it. But I thought I'd get you a close-up. Disconnecting the brakes. Reconnecting. Disconnecting. Flipping open the lever, holding one side of the skewer while I turn the other. Unscrew it a little bit. And out she comes. Alright, here we are at the front of the bike. Going straight with the furniture polish. Here, I have a filthy rag. It's kind of gunky. There wasn't a whole lot of grease. If it's really greasy, then I hit it with the Dawn Power Wash. If it's just dirty, then I use the furniture polish. Don't forget to get back here. Come on. There. Yeah. I got it. Sorta. Try to get as many of the nooks and crannies as possible. Just going with furniture polish here. Rear wheels are usually greasy. Front wheels are usually just dirty. Front wheels are away from that filthy drivetrain. So by now, I've got enough moisture, I don't know what to call it, enough polish, whatever, in my rags that you don't need a whole lot to like do things like clean rims and spokes. Just the rag is kind of damp enough that it grabs everything you want and shines things up pretty good just on its own. Ooh. I can tighten that. Pretty straight. We're just going to touch up a couple spots. So this is interesting. I'll do my best to explain it, but so right now this hub, this front hub, the hub bearings are just a smidge loose. That's a good thing, because it's called preload in bearing systems, at least the cup and cone bearing systems. I suppose it's with fixed bearings too, or sealed bearings. But anyway, the cam locking mechanism of your skewer is going to compress the whole system together a little bit. So when you put it in the bike and cram everything together, it actually moves the cones slightly, you know, just a fraction of a millimeter closer to the ball bearings anyway. So if I were to adjust this hub to be tight right now, or, you know, it would feel proper, by the time you put the wheel on, it's too tight. So it's okay to be a little loose because it ends up being just exactly perfect when you put it in the bike. But it can cause problems when you're truing the wheel if you're not careful. You know, you'll be pushing the rim over and it's just a little bit harder to get this tool to work. But everything looks to be in order here. Very good shape. Clean enough. And we're going to put her back on the bike. Skewer lever always goes on the non-drive side of the bike. And then tires, the front tire, most treads are going to have like something that resembles an arrow. Gives you a direction, so you want that pointing forward. Not always, but just about always. Holding one side and tightening the other. See how this skewer's flopping around there? Now it's sticking straight out. That's just about perfect. So I'm pulling straight up. I'm looking here. Make sure everything's centered. You really want this axle in the dropouts. Just exactly perfect. The position of the skewer, I'm going straight up on this bike. I think it's best. There's a bolt under here for the shock. Kind of gets in the way of the lever. And I don't want it sticking forward because it'd be too easy to have a stick or a rock or something flip it open. I think this is a good compromise. Good time to lubricate the front brake cable. I just kind of pull it so I get enough access to the cable here that I can slowly let gravity pull some lube down in between the cable and the housing. And that'll continue to work its way down through time. I do the same with the noodle down here. You got a noodle and a boot. Oh man. Oh baby. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's pulling pretty even from both sides from where I sit. I haven't lubed my pivots yet here. Get some right there, some behind. Just a couple drops. It usually does the trick. So the back brake, the rear brake, is a little bit, oh no, they're about the same. You can kind of look at your levers there. Is that in frame? Yeah. You can see that, you know, this gap here and this gap here are about the same. I'm gonna back this barrel adjuster out just a smidge. Lock it into place. It's kind of a cheat. I like to set my bikes up with the barrel adjusters all the way in, but sometimes it's easier just to cheat a little bit. So that was too much. I'm gonna take a little bit out. Ooh, it's perfect. 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 Saw a little piece of dust, and instead of getting a rag and really trying to get after it down in here, wake everybody up from their naps. So what I did there, again, without thinking of it, if you spin your front wheel and then grab your front brake very hard, abruptly, that's the right word, and I'm basically testing the headset preload. So is my headset loose, is the question. Spin the wheel, grab your brake, and as long as everything just stops and doesn't go brrr, if it goes brrr, then it's loose, and you have to adjust your headset bearings. This one's perfect. And then you can kind of lightly feel the steering if there's any binding or grinding or gripping or grinding. Then you want to make some adjustments. I like to drop a little bit of tri-flow in my bolt heads. That keeps things from rusting. If you're really persnickety, you can let that soak for a minute and then go through with a rag or a wire brush or some steel wool or something and really clean things up. Man, it's shiny and smooth, clean, lubed and adjusted. This bike is really close to being done. We got a couple of little details we're going to work on here. All right, somebody thought it was a good idea to put a license on their bike. I could tell you what I think of that, but you can guess. So I'm going to burn it off. Get it hot. I take a tire lever. Oh, I didn't get it hot enough. Oh man, this is going to be a tough one. All right, I'm going after it. Here we go. That poor decal underneath it. See if it survives. Nope. It's terrible. Que terrible. Don't put licenses on your bike. I mean, I guess the cops don't want to help you if you don't have a license. You can register your bikes online. There's a number of registries if you're worried about theft and finding it again, and then sometimes that'll help them turn up. Goof off. Just get the good stuff. Whew, that stuff stinks. Well, usually it goes better than that. It's okay. There's damage to some of the other ones too. And like I was saying before, you can take a little bit of furniture polish and just let it sit there, and that will likely gloss right back up. The other thing we haven't done, we have not tightened the kickstand. I'm going to get the front derailleur out of the way there. And while I'm looking at it, trim that cable. Put a new cable tip on it. You don't have to have a whole lot of extra cable in your cables. Doesn't come into play very often. And then take a 14mm wrench. Tighten that down. These grips are pretty nasty here, so I'm going to cut them off. Oh, gross. Super nasty. I think we're going to get that goof off rolling again. Ugh. Sick. It's really not that bad. Okay. You get your new grips. Hairspray. Slide them on. And let them sit. I think this brake lever is slightly out of place. Which means that this shifter is slightly out of place. Ooh, that was quick. I'm noticing this broken reflector bracket. Little bit of polishing. Again, this rag has a bit of stuff still on it. It does a really great job of shining things up. You know, the more you rub it, the cleaner it gets. And that really, really helps things when it comes time to selling them. If that's your goal. And it's definitely my goal. Look at that nasty saddle. It's a 6mm underneath here. Good and tight. It's a German word. Good and tight. Loosen up the bracket. This thing has a mount for a bag on it. Well, I don't have the bag, so. Toss that one out. Might as well clean this while you're looking at it. I happen to have a used Trek saddle that's in really good shape. And this is a small bike. I will likely sell it to a kid. And generally speaking, most kids do not care about the saddle. If this was a bigger bike, I would put a brand new saddle with cushion on it, because that's what people want. But this is going to be just a general purpose bike for a, I don't know, 10, 11-year-old kid probably. It's a 16.5-inch frame, as it says on it, which in my book means it's small. Small bikes are good for 11-year-olds, generally speaking. All right, I'm guessing on that angle. Again, seat angle is just different for everyone. But that's a good looking saddle. Major improvement. So the last thing I do with any bike is the final touches. One thing I'm noticing is that kickstand is kind of too short. It's been cut down for some reason. Mountain bikes have high bottom brackets, so you never really have to cut the kickstands down. I may or may not replace that. This saddle height is too high. Like I said, this is for a small person. We already know it's greased. I happen to kind of like this water bottle cage, but a lot of times I take them off. But just because this one has some red in it, kind of matches the bike, I'm going to leave it on. It looks pretty good on this bike. I sit on it. I grab the front brake and rock back and forth, and I'm feeling the headset again. That's all good. Make sure my brakes feel good. I'm checking the angle of my levers. I like them to be about 30 degrees. Honestly, these shift levers, I think, do a little bit better if they're angled down a smidge. I'm probably angling them down about 15 degrees from where they were. I think that's just a more natural position for a lot of people. I could be totally wrong, but that's the way I do it. And I'm not seeing a whole lot more to do on this one, honestly. You know, the pedals have a little bit of dusty schmutz on them. Wipe this crank down. What do you think? She's a beaut, Clark. Well, that's it, bike farmers. The Trek 6500 is ready to go. Really not a whole lot of surprises from this one. This is a pretty typical bike. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. I plan on releasing a couple videos a week for the next, well, for the unforeseeable future. The channel's just getting started, so like and subscribe. Tell your friends. If you're active on YouTube, share. Let people know that there's something to learn here. I'm going to try to keep things chill and keep things interesting and see where it takes me. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much.